Firstly, good morning all, and thanks for the invitation to attend today's webinar. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are present today. Over the past 4 weeks, I've met a few finance teams, and I look forward to meeting many more over the coming weeks and months. I have also prepared a couple of slides for today's webinar, and Gab will be free to distribute those later today. I plan to sort of cover 6 items, and I guess subject to time constraints, we'll respond to questions where possible. So I thought I'd kick off the session by sort of sharing some insights about me. As Tony mentioned, I've been with VAGO for 25 years. I did use a green pen in my early audit years, for those that are old enough to remember how things were done before technology sort of impacted and shaped the way that we go about business today. If you have visited Kyneton, you might recognise the picture in the middle. Piper Street is a famous street in Kyneton, a small country town about 1 hour from Melbourne. That's where I grew up, went to school, learned to fish, and played footy and tennis most weekends. I am a footy tragic. I certainly love my local footy due to its community feel. So possibly auditing the local council sector is a good fit for me. I played footy at Kyneton, Seymour, Mansfield and Daylesford before moving to Melbourne, so I've certainly got a great appreciation for the country part of our state. The number 3 represents my 3 children. I've got 2 at high school and 1 at primary school. And like many others, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the days of homeschooling are long gone. The taxi sign really reflects the fact that most weekends I'm now driving the children to a sporting commitment somewhere, and sitting by the fire is one way that I like to relax. And possibly my love for an open fire stems from growing up in Kyneton, which is, for those that have been there, can be quite chilly during the winter months. In terms of the VAGO structure, no real change. I've still got the 2 key audit divisions, and all our audits are really grouped into 7 sectors. I've assumed the responsibility for the financial audits of the councils, regional libraries and their associated entities post the Christmas break. And really the 2 red squares on the screen in front of you are just highlighting where I'm sitting in our structure, and that I report to Roberta Skleros, who is the Assistant Auditor General in Financial Audit. Sancho and I are tick-tacking in the background to sort of assist with the handover. So hopefully the transition goes pretty smoothly for all parties. This slide really just provides some information for you, just in terms of who are the key members of the local government, financial and performance audit teams within our office. You will notice there I've just listed the key firms that we work with in terms of our audit service providers. I do share information with them on a regular basis, and they are encouraged to raise issues stemming from their audit visits with us progressively as well, so that we can try and resolve key sector issues in the ideal world prior to our balance date. The next couple of slides just provide some information about VAGO and what we're up to. For those that have been exposed to us for a while, you'll probably be aware that we table an annual plan in Parliament each year. It provides an outline of our proposed financial audit and performance audit activity. The annual plan has traditionally had a 3-year outlook, but our plan for 22-23 is likely to contain just 2 out years. And as an office, we are currently revisiting all the topics that were earmarked for 22-23 and 23-24 in our previous plan. Our consultation period with key stakeholders has commenced. If an agency was earmarked or identified as being involved in a future performance audit, we've written out to them. We've shared details around the topic, the scope of the audit, and those agencies are asked to provide feedback by the 14th of March. So if you haven't received a letter, you can probably assume that you're not in scope for a performance audit, so that could be good news. And then obviously if you have received a letter, yeah, just encourage the council to provide feedback to our office. There's a number of performance audits underway at any point in time in our office. There are two that involve a few councils. They're both earmarked for to be tabled in Parliament during May of 2022. When I turn my attention to financial audit, I've started off by listing COVID-19. I think COVID-19 and its continuing impact on all of us, shouldn't be underestimated. The need for staff that test positive and all their close contacts to isolate for 7 days, is a risk that may impact, our delivery, our intention to complete certain tasks, might impact our timelines. I know personally last week, one of our children tested positive to COVID, and then we went into 7 days of isolation with no real warning as to what was about to happen. So it can impact our lives and is likely to continue to interrupt us some way going forward. I've got the state election listed next, and look, I know that local government is being the third tier of government is probably less impacted by this, but there could be a direct or indirect impact of the state election. I guess what I'm aware of is that the last sitting date is the 15th of September, and for many other sectors, they're dependent on the minister tabling their annual report in Parliament before it can actually be uploaded to their website and made publicly available. So you can work backwards from there. For some organisations to have their financial statements, prepared, audited, adopted by the end of August, printed early September for tabling, it's going to be fairly unrealistic in a lot of situations. We're going to run a tender round prior to 30 June 2022 with respect to the 22-23 audit cycle. There will be some councils that will form a part of that tender round. And as has been past practice, at the right junction, someone from our office will reach out to the Chief Finance Officer to confirm that there's no conflicts of interest from your perspective with respect to our preferred supplier. Like prior years, I'll be generating a results of audit 21-22 local government report for tabling in Parliament. But this is probably like an example of something that will be impacted by the state election. As an office, we're not able to table this particular report unless Parliament is sitting. So for us, until the election's held, until the new government's sworn in and sitting days are set, we won't be able to table that report. So my gut feel at the moment is, we could be looking at January or February of 2023 before you'll see that report, which is not ideal, but that's where we're going to be. As an office, we're looking to host another Audit Committee Chairs Forum in June. This has become an annual event, so just sort of stay tuned in that space. The next two slides aim to provide an insight into what I see as the key audit risks and area of focus for 21-22. I think it's important to note that the audit strategies that will be presented and discussed at audit committee meetings won't necessarily have all the items listed here, as the risks will have a different level of significance from council to council. But what I wanted to do today was just to give you a high-level snapshot as to where I see the audit teams, both in-house or our audit service providers, spending their effort. I guess a good example there is if I look at the interface councils, they're in the growth corridors, the level of development activity is significant. So developer contributions represent a large portion of total revenue and therefore warrant an audit response. Government grants, is another one that I've picked up from this first 4 to 5 weeks, is that for some councils, government grants represent up to 40% of total revenue, but then for others, it might only be 10% of revenue. So again, The level of interest, the focus will vary from council to council. I do see the valuation of property, infrastructure, plant and equipment and COVID, which has many elements to it impacting all councils. And obviously with the performance statement, you know, I'm interested in the systems that you have in place to capture the data to hopefully result in both a complete and accurate performance statement that complies with the regulations. Now, I acknowledge this slide is probably a little bit busy, and we could probably spend 30 minutes or maybe even an hour chatting about accounting for government grants, but I don't propose to do that today. I think the key messages are really that accounting for government grants requires management to exercise judgment. Really just encourage you to start with 15, so don't start with 1058, you've got to start with 1015. Follow the 5-step sort of model, assess whether or not we have sufficiently specific performance obligations. And if I was just to sort of give a couple of examples that we've made up for today's session, if you receive a grant that talks about, you know, improve the dietary needs of senior citizens, that's a very general requirement. So you would sort of recognise that funding as income under 1058. If you have a funding agreement where you need to deliver 5,000 meals over a 6-month period, that's quite specific. You can measure whether you have or haven't delivered. You would apply AASB 15, and obviously you'll have a contract liability at balance date in relation to any of those meals that haven't been delivered. I also, based on my experience in auditing the hospitals and health services over the last couple of years, I guess really encourage you to assess whether or not your funding agreements have any recall provisions. And then if they do, seek clarification at balance date, especially into your key funding agreements, as to whether or not the recall provisions have been activated or waived. That's a key point. And look, sector by sector, it might be different, but I know in the health space, the last 2 years, you know, they do receive funding to deliver a certain activity, but their ability to deliver that activity has been impacted by COVID. Therefore, the funding body said, okay, look, we know that you couldn't deliver what you needed to deliver. You still needed to keep your doors open. You still had staff employed. So look, just keep the funding and we move on to the next funding year. So whilst the funding would initially been accounted for under 15, once we got to our balance date, what hadn't been delivered based on advice and correspondence from the government, what was left to be spent was recognised as income because there was no further obligations to be delivered. What else have I got there? Probably the last bullet point is one of, if there is a grant program where all or many councils are receiving funding, I guess I, like probably many people on today's call, would like to ensure that that particular funding agreement is being accounted for in a consistent manner. So if we do have something in that space, look, I'm more than happy to you know, look at that agreement, try and form a view in conjunction with our audit service providers, and obviously we can compare our position to you know, the sector's position if that is considered. In terms of the model accounts, won't say too much here. Daniel's obviously done a good overview as to what's played out. I guess obviously I'm aware that the model, actually there's probably a couple of things. So the model is a model, but I note that local government is different to other sectors that I've audited, in that under the local government regulations, you need to comply with the model. But in saying that, line items and disclosures that aren't relevant to a particular council should be deleted. And if there's a disclosure that relates to an immaterial line item, it can be deleted. So I guess the message from me is exercise your judgment, delete what's not relevant, not material, and we should be in a good space. And obviously in the model, there are some areas where you need to tailor the disclosures to reflect your individual council circumstances. As an office, we have previously released a publication around sort of streamlining financial reports, and if you haven't had a look at it yet, feel free to click on the link and go from there. All right, for those that were perhaps falling asleep, hopefully the little ripple effect there woke you up. Look, I'm aware that some councils have had a significant turnover of staff within finance, whilst others have remained fairly stable. Regardless of your situation, I hope the following content is useful as you turn your attention to financial reporting. In terms of, I guess, your project plan, hopefully you'll cover off the following elements. Key stakeholders. You'll have thought about and documented who are your key internal stakeholders. Is it the council? Is it the audit committee? Is it senior management? Is it your reports and comms team? In terms of your external stakeholders, is it the minister? Is it LGV? Obviously the external auditor. In terms of milestones, make sure that they're detailed and also realistic. Hopefully you've thought about your resources. Do we need to engage any experts? Which I guess the one that springs to mind is the valuation of your pipe assets. Do you have the right number of staff? Do you have the right skill set? In terms of task allocation, do we have good role clarity? Have we got lines of accountability in place? Have we assigned tasks? Materiality. We often hear about materiality from an audit point of view, but I encourage all agencies that are preparing accounts to set a materiality level yourself, because that can actually help guide you in terms of which line items you require additional disclosure in your accounts. Identify and resolve issues. I suspect that will be happening. It's really one of, raise key issues with your auditors and your audit committee prior to 30 June where possible. Internal quality assurance. Guess just be clear in terms of, the who, the when, the what, who's going to review what's produced prior to handing it over to your auditors. The information systems, with the evolution of technology, a number of things that used to be manual are now automated, but obviously have that, self-assessment awareness as to whether your key controls have operated as intended to reduce the risk of error. We've then got shell accounts. Now that the model's been released, there's an opportunity for everyone to make an early start, which obviously then will hopefully help the draft accounts process at year end. The monthly management accounts, they obviously have a role to play here because, I guess for councils that might be, tracking performance. It's always good to sort of see a bit of a reconciliation between, what you've been communicating on a monthly basis or quarterly basis compared to what they look like in the draft accounts. And obviously analytical review. If you do an analytical review, you sit back and go, can I explain the movements in key balances? Does it make sense? If yes, well then you've probably reduced the risk of having an error in your accounts before the auditors come along. And obviously based on the nature of your accounts, where there is a requirement to compare budget versus actual figures at some of the notes, obviously your council annual budget has a key role in the whole process. That pretty much brings me to the end of what I was going to comment on. So sort of happy to take any questions from here.
Well, thanks, Travis. And as I've always said, if there's any questions, please place them through the chat or put your hand up. But so far, Travis, so good in terms of questions. None have really filtered through yet. But I guess from a FinPro perspective, I'd like to thank you for the presentation and making yourself available and welcome you to the sector. I guess I probably did have one question in relation to the Audit Committee Chair Forum, and just if you can maybe give a bit of insight into what, even just a couple of points in terms of what you typically cover in those forums for the chairs.
We would generally have, and actually I'm just making sure the slides that I did have on it, have I stopped sharing or not?
Not yet. One sec.
No, there they are. It was on the other screen, so all good.
That's all right.
In terms of the Audit Committee Chairs Forum, as a general rule, you'd hear from the Auditor General. He'd probably talk in relation to some strategic matters. We've had our Deputy Auditor General, Dave Barry, who was previously a CEO at, I think it was either Alpine Shire Council or another one up in that area. he'll provide an update on perhaps what's happening in terms of the IT space. As an office, we've certainly spent a little bit of time and effort strengthening in our IT infrastructure, strengthening our controls. I didn't really realise it at the time, but we were sort of, on the Office 365, the use of Teams prior to the COVID pandemic hitting. And I sort of look back now and go, well, actually, as an office, we were actually ahead of the game. Ahead of the game in the sense of when we all, moved to, if you can work from home, you must work from home. I saw many organisations scrambling to purchase laptops and devices and set up home sort of offices, but we were already in that space. So yeah, certainly I think Dave Barry would share insights in the technology space. You probably hear some discussion around internal control frameworks, expectations of councils, and if there's some sort of topical issue, we would look to cover that off. Roberta Skleros would touch on items from a financial audit perspective, at a really high level. That would be the general flavour, as I understand it.
Well, thanks, Travis. Thanks again. If there's any questions that anyone thinks of later, we can always bring them to your attention anyway. But yeah, thanks again for your time.